at the very minimum, what an organization can do now is to develop that framework and understand your purpose and your values and your principles, articulate that and live by it without hypocrisy, and you will have integrity. The thing is, not everyone is going to like that.
Welcome to the Rich with Purpose podcast, the finance podcast that's about more than just money. I'm your host, Thabojan Rasiah, financial advisor to hundreds of successful clients over the years. In each episode of this show, I speak with other experts in the complex world of money and finance, and together we discuss how you can ensure you make smart decisions with your money. Even more importantly, how to connect those decisions with your values and your purpose in order to achieve everything that is most important to you. Please note that everything we discuss is not personal advice, but general in nature. For the full disclaimer, please visit our website, richwithpurpose.com.au, where you can also register your details to get access to all our free resources. And please hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. In episode 15, I speak to Cris Parker. Cris works at the Ethics Centre, a not-for-profit organisation that develops and delivers innovative programs, services and experiences designed to bring ethics to the centre of our lives. What sets Cris apart, however, is that she leads both the Ethics Alliance and the Banking and Finance Oath, which are two of Australia's most profound initiatives working to bring ethics into the everyday lives of businesses and professionals. In this episode, we explore ethics from many different angles. We discuss values and the importance of understanding our own personal values when making ethical choices and decisions, including financial decisions. We talk about the importance of communication to ensure we understand the ethics of others in our relationships, as well as the current trust deficit and the role of ethics in financial advice profession. We also consider the challenges and realities of ethical investing and some of the things we have to consider and understand as investors. So if you're interested in learning about the ethics in life and investing, you will enjoy this episode of the Rich with Purpose podcast. Welcome to the Rich with Purpose podcast, Cris Parker.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Great to have you on, Cris. Really interested for this chat. You are involved in ethics and the Banking and Finance Oath and the Ethics Centre, and you've been involved in this area for a long time, and so I'm really interested in, I think, not just thinking about it from a money perspective, but from the way that we think as people. You've seen it all probably and seen so many different angles, so it's going to be really interesting to dig a bit deeper and see what you think this whole term ethics and, especially these days, ESG and all this sort of stuff's, buzzwords that are going around a bit. So I'm very interested in your perspective on all of that. But before we get into that, Cris, firstly, how did you get into this world of ethics, I guess?
Yeah, so I sort of came in a really unusual way, probably. I started off my life as a performer, as an actor. And I enjoyed that a lot, actually. And I went to the United States. I went to New York, as you do. And I had a theatre company over there. Eventually, I became an excellent waitress, absolutely excellent waitress. Waited on a lot of actors. No, but I did perform. I had a theatre company, which I enjoyed very much. I met someone over there, an American partner. We had a child over there. But he had a look at Australia and just couldn't wait to get here. He didn't actually like New York at all. So we came out here. And when I was here, we had a restaurant. So my husband was a chef as well. And I was still acting here, stage and film and TV. And then when I decided, I thought I want to have another kid, a friend of mine was editing and said, would you like to have a go at this? And I said, that looks kind of fun. And I loved it. So then had a production company and made films. I've found myself actually being more comfortable on that side of the camera. And also had a casting agent for a while. which was also very interesting, meeting very interesting people. And then when I had this production company with my work colleague, and she had decided that she wanted to, sorry, that's my dog. She had decided that she wanted to do something different. And I thought, well, I don't want to do this on my own, because when you're a creative and storytelling, it's great to bounce things off other people. I think it's essential. So I thought, well, I'm loving humans. I'm loving the stories of humans and how they work and how they think and the amazing things humans do. So I'll get a psychology degree. Maybe I'll go and become a psychologist. So then I got a psychology degree. And in my last semester, I did a placement at the Ethics Centre. And when I was at the Ethics Centre, I was working on sort of this project with a guy called Tim Supamasan, and we were doing a symposium around the ethics of asylum seeking. And I think I just got such a strong interest and desire to work with justice, or to work with, whether it was social justice, I'm not sure. I got expelled from school too over something similar, just feeling something was unfair. So so I was doing that, and then they asked me if I wanted to stay, and I said yes, please. And that was 10 years ago now. And since that time, I think I've just spent a lot of time, learning about ethics. Obviously, Dr. Simon Longstaff is my boss, and regularly talks to us about ethics, or doing philosophy classes or behavioral science. I've been doing quite a lot of work around that. So that my interest in that has just exploded. And I've been able to combine that, I suppose, with storytelling and just listening to a lot of people in business and financial services. So currently, I'll tell you what I do at the centre. Currently, I am a director of the Banking and Finance Oath. I head up the Oath, which I've done for 7 years. And also I head up our Ethics Alliance, which I've done for a few years, which is a platform, an organisational platform.
Yeah, right.
Which I can tell you more about if you want.
Yeah, well, that's an amazing background, Cris. I didn't know most of that about you. So thanks for sharing that background and that journey.
Okay. It's a little odd.
No, it's fascinating, the paths that we all take to get to where we end up at this stage in our lives or careers. And that journey is really important as well, because, sometimes you can be on a trajectory which is just based on, a course or an education or a career path. But sounds like you sort of landed in this spot based on your values, I guess.
Sort of did, yeah.
Yeah, and found the right fit. So, which is the perfect segue, because one of the things I wanted to ask you, and we will get into a bit more about the Ethics Centre and the Banking and Finance Oath, but this concept of values more broadly, it's always an interesting thing to talk about, because we all do have differences in our values and the things that are important to us and what drive us. And where do you see values fitting into the whole conversation when it comes to ethics?
Well, it's essential to understand what values are when determining ethical choices and decisions. I suppose unpacking it, starting with values alone, at the centre we would say that values are what one considers is good. I think there's an idea that more from the Greek philosophers, it's a bit like they loved axioms. An axiom is, an example of an axiom is the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. So an axiom is something that is undeniably is, and is proven by evidence that is. And that would be that human beings always choose what is good about everything. So if I had I just had a glass of water, right? So if I had a bottle of water here, I would choose to drink from the glass of water because I'm on camera and it would look much better if I drank from a glass than if I chugged down on a big bottle. It's just a silly little thing, but that would be the good thing to do, right? So that idea of what is good to you, what is it in your life that you feel gives you joy, that gives you a sense of satisfaction, that makes you feel proud, that makes you feel that what you've done is right. So that's sort of what you value. And interestingly,
it's a personal thing, right? Because when we talk
oh
about what is
yeah,
good,
it's
like
totally up to you
it's not
at
good
that
or
time.
bad. It's
Yeah,
what's good to yourself.
that's right. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of people don't consider what they value until they come up in a situation where they're feeling tension or they're feeling divided. So, the classic one in the corporate world, of course, is the whistleblower who has a strong value for loyalty, but also a very strong value for honesty or, or being legal or whatever that might be. And that real angst around, well, if I say something, then I'm going to be, putting all my friends under the bus. So that's an example of one. But
there's even self-preservation and all those other things that come into
duty, yeah, and your duty, professionalism, your duty to your family. Suddenly it's like, well, do I want to risk losing my job because I support my family, perhaps? But the thing is, the important thing about ethics, which is what we talk about at the Ethics Centre, is that it's which is an applied ethics centre, really, is that when you're making ethical decisions, it's more than just about what you value. So, because you can choose to do something because you think it's good, but that doesn't mean it's an ethical decision. You also have to consider what is right. So, what was the name of that advisor? Melissa Caddick? Was it Caddick?
Caddick. Yes.
So let's say, I'm sure Melissa Caddick valued success. She probably valued maybe her self-esteem. I mean, to go through the lying and sort of Ponzi scheme and inventing her credentials.
I'm sorry, I'll just pause there, Chris. Sorry to interrupt, but just for those listening, if you don't know who Melissa Caddick was, she was and I'm just going off my limited understanding of the situation, but she seemed to be a genuinely successful financial advisor who was operating within the law and did very well for many years. But somewhere along the way, more recently, she ended up giving advice, illegally and unofficially giving advice and essentially taking people's money to fund her own lifestyle, and left a lot of people in her wake that trusted her worse off, and it looks like she did the wrong thing. So that's this example that Chris is talking to.
Thanks. Well, the only reason I bring that up, it could be anything, is that what may have felt good in that situation to that advisor, to her, was not necessarily right. So success is a good value to have. There's no reason it's not. Financial success is a great value, but how are you going to go about achieving that? Are you going to steal and lie, etc., or cheat? Then that's not good. So an ethical decision is very much around knowing what your purpose is and then underpinning that with both your values and your principles.
Yeah, okay. So you made a distinction there, which I think is an important one, between right or wrong, which may be more of a societal thing that impacts not just ourselves but others, compared to good and bad, because you can do something that's good for yourself but without consideration of others.
It's like sports stars. You might value winning, but are you going to take enhancement drugs? Well, that's not the right thing to do.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And so I guess there's an importance of us having some understanding of what our own values are, and being able to, without being aware of them even, than making choices that are contrary to those values. If it's the
Yeah,
right
I
thing,
think,
it could be difficult, right?
yeah, and I do think that, you know, it is about looking at those times where you get that strong sense of satisfaction, or that sense of pride when you do something and you feel really glad that you've done that, and to stop and go, why do I feel so glad I've done that? What was it that I valued so much that made me feel that way? So I think it is worth taking the time to do that. I know online there's a number of, you can go online and look at how do I determine my values, and there's a number of different ways that you can do that. I always think it's good to take that time, because we rationalize a lot, you know, and override the values. And in a worst case scenario, we can experience what we would call moral injury, which is very symptomatic to post-traumatic stress syndrome. So you'll receive similar symptoms, and that's when you're being put in a position where you're being asked to do something that is actually really opposed to your own personal values. Originally came out of the military, for obvious reasons. Nursing, became quite prominent in nursing, and I spoke to a vet one time, and she'd gone into the profession because she loved animals and cared for them and wanted to make them healthy. And then she found herself in a situation where people who were downsizing their homes were going in and asking her to put their animals down because their apartments didn't take pets, or they were too small, or, you know, and she found that crippling, and also realized that even if she said no, they're just going to go to someone else who's going to say yes. So she was in a real quandary as to whether she could actually continue in that profession because of that practice, or whether she wanted to try and advocate for that to not be allowed. But that's an example. It was making her quite ill.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, whatever the profession you're in, but I know just from firsthand in financial services that at the end of the day, you know, everyone's got to, and even when you say got to, what is that? What, you know, what do you have to do? But you know, we're motivated by, you know, survival to a certain extent, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs and some of those basics, and looking after our families and those sorts of things. So, you know, there are plenty of people that are doing stuff that they would probably prefer not to do if they had no financial burden or responsibilities and had ultimate choice. Yet,
but I think that's a bit different, right? Because there's definitely people that are doing things they don't want to do, but it doesn't mean that what they're doing is necessarily opposed to what they value.
No, that's true. But I think what I was thinking of was sometimes you are in that position where you have and I've seen these examples where people do things which they have to convince themselves that it's okay and justify it. Otherwise, they couldn't live with themselves doing something if they confronted it. But at the same time, you know, if you need a job, for example, you kind of convince yourself, well, I need to do this.
I think
there's extreme examples where it's obvious, but there's probably more examples where it's very borderline, and it's very grey, I guess.
And I do. I mean, I think we saw a lot of that through the Hayne Royal Commission. But, you know, I think that's my partner doesn't really like his job. It doesn't create huge angst for him, but he doesn't particularly like it, and he balances that with filling his life with things he really does love to do. So I think that is possibly one way of approaching that. But I do think that if you're in a job and you feel strongly that your employer is asking you to do something that you really do feel uncomfortable with, and you've approached the employer and said, but, you know, this is what this is causing, you know, angst, or this is making me uncomfortable, and you put your case forward, and they say, well, sorry, that's what we do. I mean, really, you should almost look for another job, because that feeling of moral injury can really be quite crippling.
Mm. And I think that manifests itself in satisfaction as well, right? Sometimes satisfaction is just like, I don't like what I'm doing, but sometimes that satisfaction is because deep down you know that maybe you're not doing the best you could do, or maybe
Maybe.
I don't know. So I know that this is the first chat we've had on this podcast, but the podcast is called Rich with Purpose, and it's positioned that way because of the way that we work with our clients and sharing that with our listeners, which is that we think we find that it's invaluable for us to be having conversations with our clients about what their values are, what their purpose is, not because not to have any judgment, but I think people make better decisions for themselves when they're having those internal or external conversations, and the more that the people we work with have those conversations and think about those things, the happier they are with the decisions they make, because they're in alignment with their personal values and purpose. Again, not to say that anyone should do something a certain way, but I think if you look internally, you can challenge yourself to try and do that.
Yeah. Definitely. I think that's just it. I think that discussion that you're having with your clients about what their purpose and values are actually allows them to shape their future. If you're not talking about what that is, then how can you control what your future is going to be, really?
Yeah, in fact, after doing it in this way for a number of years, we find it virtually impossible to advise our clients without having those discussions, because we almost think, well, how can you make a decision about what you invest in if you don't know what it's for and what's important to you and what you're trying to achieve?
What you think is good, right?
The return is irrelevant if you don't know what the purpose is behind it. So, but that's just our approach of it.
Yeah, and I think it does get tricky then when you start to look at the complexity of life, the complexity of business, and you start to consider supply chains, or you start to consider the consequences of the actions of the third person down the line, and just how far do you need to go, and how many issues. So you don't just have one value, you have many, many, many values. How do you decide which one you want to prioritize? Is it about the purpose? Is it, so it's complex. It's complex.
I
definitely.
liked what you said earlier, where and correct me if I've got this wrong, but it was something along the lines of you can do certain things and feel good about it, feel good that you're doing the right thing. For me, that's a pretty good gauge when you're having these deep conversations about things that are pretty important from a fundamental self perspective. And if you do feel good about it, I don't know, maybe that's a pretty good gauge as to whether it is in alignment with your broad values and purpose, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, understanding what the purpose is, but yeah, I think if you do something and you think, wow, I'm kind of proud that I did that. That felt really good. You definitely work out what it is that you value. It's when those two strong values conflict that it's really hard. It's really hard.
Yeah.
I have been in a situation once where it was so difficult for me that I was really quite paralyzed. And I went to someone at work to help me go through that. And I ultimately did. And what ended up happening, the decision that I had to make, I didn't like it. I didn't like either decision I was going to have to make. It was a lose-lose for me. It was lose-lose. And I think that doesn't help. You have win-wins, but lose-lose, that's really difficult. So the only pleasure, the only saving grace out of it really was to know that once the decision was made, that I had truly dug quite deep and thought about it and contemplated it, so that even though I didn't like what I had to do, I was proud of what I did. It was the right thing to do ultimately. The Ethics Centre has a service called Ethical, and I'm a counsellor on that service. I'm an ethical or ethics counsellor. It's a free service, and you can get
So it's it's like a hotline, is it, or something like that?
Sort of. Well, yeah, but you can get online to the Ethics Centre, ethics.org.au, and you can book in an hour, and you can have an hour with the counsellor over any ethical dilemma that you might have. And we have a very strict framework that we take people through to, assess the dilemma and the behinds and a number of things around it. And then we take people through different ethical lenses, which unearth different values that they have, or values from different perspectives. And so that by the end of it, again, you don't always get to a decision, mind you, at the end of it, but at least by the end of it, there's a deeper understanding of why this is an ethical dilemma, a deeper understanding of like, oh, okay, I really value, the safety of my children, versus whatever it might be. And understanding that then allows you the opportunity to own that and determine, well, which is more important to me? And then going through that, and sometimes we go through that process and that's already decided, so that by the end of the phone call, you're left with, okay, so, and the most important part about an ethical decision after you've gone through a process of realizing all this is that you actually act on it. It's amazing how many people go, oh, right, okay, well, that's why I feel this way. But you have to act on it because it can be uncomfortable, And then we will, talk about options, And the other thing too, when you get into an ethical dilemma, it becomes this binary place where you just feel you can do this or you can do that. And that's your only choice. You're so trapped. I don't know which one I'm going to do. I'm completely stuck. This is an ethical dilemma. And then you're able to go, well, what about this? Have you thought about that? Well, why? Why is that your only choice? So really looking at the assumptions that we make, that you do make when you feel quite trapped. Anyway, I recommend anyone who has any dilemma, it can be a personal or a work dilemma, because sometimes our personal dilemmas impact our work. So you think, oh, I should really work this out, But it's a remarkable service.
That's a really valuable service. So it's Ethical, and it's on ethics.org.au.
At the Ethics Centre. It's free. You get a full hour. And, if you need to call back again, you may not get the same person, but if you need to call back, you can call back. And it's just, it's just someone, we don't tell you what to do. I'm not emotionally invested in your dilemma whatsoever. It's all about you, the caller. Why are you feeling this way? What are we valuing? What are the relationships? What are the rules? Have you considered all of this? So it's a great service.
That sounds great. So we'll put a reference to that in the show notes as well, Cris, for anyone listening who wants to check it out. So, we're really talking about ethics now, Cris, from values and some of those other issues we're talking about. So ethics and is ethics a framework for making decisions? Is it a way to, is that how you define ethics?
That's how I would define it. It's how the centre. So often when I say to people, what do you think ethics is? You'll get things like, it's doing the right thing, it's following your gut instinct, it's common sense. Sometimes you'll say it's moral, it's doing the moral thing. Sometimes you'll get it's doing the legal thing. But yeah, I would define it as a decision-making process or framework, I suppose, which goes back to what I said before, the purpose, the values, and the principles. And it's contextual.
Yes,
I suppose what ethics really is inviting curiosity and reflection and contemplation into your decisions.
Right. With the and an ethical decision, how does that fit into it? So if ethics is inviting contemplation into those
into your
decisions,
decision making,
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and then
Yeah.
making an ethical decision, that's
That's the
the
product
decision
of
that you
that
come to, the
self-reflection.
product.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And sometimes the
So
hardest part.
yeah, taking action, and I guess that process is critical in terms of that. And some of us have studied ethics, and it's not
Mm.
simple. There's so many different
Well, there's
ways
all
to
those
look at it. So
frameworks. Well,
yeah,
and that's just it. That's another thing we do really well at the centre. My colleague John, it's that idea of you might be a deontologist, which means that your duty and the rules are really important to you, or you might be a consequentialist. I mean, it's the old trolley experiment, the classic trolley experiment.
yeah.
You might be a
That's the one where you've
consequentialist.
got a
Well,
trolley
you've got a
going
lever.
down like a
Yeah, you got a trolley going down. It's aiming for 5 people. It's going to kill 5 people, but you're right there at a lever. And if you move that lever, you'll take the train off that track and it'll only kill 1 person. Do you pull that lever? And then the next version on top of that, which was added by a different person, is that you're standing on a bridge and there's a fairly large person standing there with you, and you see the train coming and it's going straight for 5 people. Would you push that person onto the track to stop the train? So you are consciously making that choice, as opposed to if you're flicking a lever, you're leaving yourself just that little bit, connected or separated from the decision.
yeah.
And that's that idea of what is more important to you, the outcome, so the consequences of your action, or deontological is your duty as a human, and the rules and things that we should follow. That's simplifying it very, very much. And then there's a virtue, which is the third one, which is the sort of the 3 prominent ones, I suppose. And the virtue is about, and it's an interesting one, it's about, what does my action say about me as a person? And when we work with organizations, it's very similar. It's like, so what is that saying about your corporate character, your corporate, person per se? And there is, and I feel very strongly about this in a way. I don't know that I am a virtue. I don't know which one I am. Actually, I'm not sure. I'm still thinking about it all. But I do believe that as individuals, and I think this is where the banking finance comes in, the BFO, as individuals, when we make choices, we test what our values are. So you're testing, and every time you make that choice, you are in some way testing your values, and you're shaping who you are. So every time you make a choice, you're actually informing that next choice. So if you see something and you think, oh gosh, I forgot to ask the customer for the signature. Look, I know they wanted to sign it. They signed everything else. Honestly, I just know. And you forge a signature, but you're not, that you're not doing it for self-gain. You're doing it actually just so that the poor customer doesn't have to come back in again. And, it's COVID now, it's 2 weeks, the house might not be on the market anymore. And there's a lot of reasons why it's okay for you to sign that signature, right? But that decision will inform your next decision. So your next decision will be just that little bit easier. It's incremental ethics, right? Just that little bit easier to go, oh, no, it's fine. I'll just add that $1,000. I didn't tell them about it, but, if I told them, it is what it is. It's $1,000. I left it off the invoice, whatever you're doing. And that develops who you are.
It's a behavioral. It becomes a behavioral thing, right?
It becomes a behavioral thing, and you are an ambassador to people around you. So if you're an organization and somebody sees you do that, you're telling them, well, that's what we do around here, and that's okay. And it works so beautifully in reverse. So the other day, I spoke to someone who was a BFO ambassador, and they were asked to do something that they were very uncomfortable with. And so they said, oh, I'm sorry, I can't do that. I've taken an oath. And I said, oh, how did that go down? Because it was someone quite senior and they were a little intimidated, and would have been very hard to do that. And I said, what happened? And they said, oh, well, the person just went, I mean, what does someone say to that? You can't, oh, okay, move on. And I said, and how did it make you feel? And they said, well, it was really nice to have a sort of an arm's length from me personally as a junior saying, oh, I don't really feel comfortable doing that, because they didn't have that confidence. And I said, do you think you'll do that again? And they said, yes, I'll do it again, but I can feel a growth in confidence, and I know that I will not have to rely on that I'll just feel okay to say, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that. And so, I think we often talk about moral courage. I actually like to talk about it as a moral confidence in the business environment, if possible. Courage sounds scary.
Well, I mean, what could have easily happened, and we've heard stories of this before, is that senior person could have said, well, I don't care how you feel about it, just bloody do it, right?
Just do it.
I've told you to do it, just do it.
Yeah, or who's your manager?
And then what? And then what,
And then you've done this. One, either you go through the moral injury area where they feel terribly guilty, or two, they rationalize it and just go, oh, well, this is just part of how we do business around here. Yeah. If the person said, don't be stupid, it's done all the time. Oh, okay. Oh,
Yeah, interesting. And then we've got, with these ethical decisions and choices that come about, what about the appearance of ethics and the whole virtue signaling? And I mean, I find that I feel like it's more and more prevalent now than ever before. I feel like it is, that there's this whole, you want to be putting out the perception that you're ethical or whatever. Whether you are or not, it's a different thing. But
where
do you sit on that?
Look, I think it's a really hard time. I think, if you are, I remember when the same-sex marriage, when the plebiscite was coming through, there was a rainbow on every single label in the city. And the thing is, and it's a really interesting thing, I've been talking about this with the Alliance CEOs that are members of the Ethics Alliance, which is what I also run up. And when does a CEO or an organization stick their head above the parapet and say they believe in a social cause or whatever that might be? And they're really interesting. And overall, the idea was, if you're not actively engaged in this social cause, whatever it may be, within your own institution, but you go out to the public in support of this, well, then there's a hypocrisy at place here. And hypocrisy is the death of ethics. But in the same vein, so that I feel strongly about that, and I think you should only be speaking of your ethics out loud if you feel so strongly about it and your organization actually can have an impact on what it is that you're talking about. But in the same breath, I do feel it's very difficult for organizations to try to keep up with the Joneses with regards to a reputation, to try to be a part of the community, to try to, feel that sense of belonging. And so I think there are occasions where organizations or individuals will espouse to the values of whatever the social situation, or support the social situation at the time, and they mean it in their heart. But because there's no evidence of them doing that in their organisation, they get slammed for sort of virtue signalling. And then there are those people that literally just do it so that they can say that they are literally virtue signaling, and they get caught out pretty quickly by their actions. I just think there is a middle person in there that wants to be a part of that. And I think they just need to be really transparent about why they're being outspoken about it. There were situations with the plebiscite where there was discrimination against same-sex couples within an institution, and their logos had been turned rainbow. And when that comes out, the damage to your reputation is way, way more than the positive aspect of the reputation of creating a rainbow out of your logo, you know. And so authenticity.
I mean, that's the question, right? Is it ethical to use ethics for purely for gain? And you sound very you're being very generous, I think, in your assessment there, because in the corporate world, perhaps there's a lot of purely using some of these things because it's the right look.
I know, but it's for reputational gain, and that's a worry. And I would say to anyone that's head of reputation, and we do have, those people, or even if it's the corporate affairs people that you're speaking to say, well, one, why? Why are you coming out? What's your purpose? I think that's your first thing. And if the purpose is because we really believe in it, this is what we're doing. Okay, so what do you do in your organization to support it? Well, and why do we need to know that? Why do you need to be explicit about it? So, I mean, I don't know if I'm being generous. I just think I'm being realistic. I think there are people that want to do it. It goes back to that idea where intentions are not enough. Good intentions are not. What's the road to? What is the road to heaven is paved with good intentions? Good intentions is not enough. You have to implement and follow through on what you're saying. So virtue signaling is not a good look.
So it's a good lead into professional relationships and understanding the ethics of other people that we have relationships with or go into business with or are associated with.
I think part of an ethical relationship, a huge part of that is empathy. And understanding that whatever decisions and choices that you make, that it's going to impact all your stakeholders and the people you have relationships with. So I think an understanding of, a stakeholder, I'll use the word stakeholder, sorry, it's a bit corporate-y, but the understanding of a stakeholder's positioning and values, etc., is a huge part of what empathy means. Because this relationship is going to be seen from two perspectives. You need to be able to put your shoes into their feet and go, right, so how is this going to feel for you if this is what you value? And this is, So I think that that's sort of a necessity to have that empathy in a relationship. I think that the most important thing, I suppose, and it's always said over and over, is transparency and an openness. And upfront communication. It's amazing how we take communication for granted, and how miscommunication is often the seed for just disastrous relationships. And a lot of that is around, again, empathizing and understanding cultural differences, or understanding industry differences, or industry norms, and what communication means like to different businesses.
Because I guess without that communication, we do tend to assume that other people are like us. So when we're dealing with somebody else, we think, well, one example might be, well, I'm pretty ethical, so I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to expect the same of someone that I deal with, and if it's not communicated clearly, then, and we saw this in the Banking Royal Commission, where customers or clients thought that they would be dealt with transparently, and etc., and certain things done, and then maybe the party on the other side thought, well, they know that we work for a particular product provider or whatever, and that's the way we do things. And so I guess it works on both sides. If someone else thinks, oh, they're not going to get too hung up on ethics, they just want to get me the best outcome, that might not be the case from the other side either.
Mm. And I think what's happened, unfortunately, and it's not just in financial services. I mean, look at our government. I think that, the trust deficit has been just so damaging, so terribly damaging. It's really, it's so damaging. I think it's at a point where our expectation is that they're going to do something bad. So get ready, And
what a shame, isn't it?
I do speak a little bit with the converted. I speak the organisations in the Alliance are, they're a part of the Ethics Alliance because they recognise that ethics is important in shaping their businesses, and they're there to share those insights and experiences and challenges. But yeah, hopefully,
So,
I'm actually a bit of an optimist. So hopefully.
Oh no, definitely. I think things are. Yeah, I mean, in our industry and in financial services, things are really heading in the right direction. And
they really are. Yeah, they
advisors
really
out there.
are.
So it's as far as I'm concerned, it's the best time for people to be getting advice because there's some really good advice out there. So.
And also, I mean, you've become a profession. Advisors have become a profession, which is, an absolute privilege, really.
Definitely.
Yeah.
One of the things that did come out of the Royal Commission and continues to be something that's discussed is conflicts of interest. And so when we talk about conflicts of interest, I guess we mean something that, or putting the interests of others ahead of yourself. Is that the best way to define that, or is there a better way to do that?
Well, that's more of a definition of professionalism, putting the client's interest above all else.
Yes.
The conflict comes when there's a third party, whether it's yourself or someone else, whose interests you are considering at all, really. Like it's quite from a professional perspective, there's a hard line there. And
can you give
us
an example of that, Cris?
So if you advising, I mean, the more nefarious example, of course, that we saw in the Royal Commission is that your employer provides a product and you're licensed even to an organisation that only provides a suite of products, and you have a client, and those products are very good. Don't get me wrong, they're absolutely fine. They're just like everything else, but you're not going to let your client know what the other ones are because these are the ones your employer offers. So it's an interesting dilemma in that sense, and it's more of the vertical integration. The integrated model is, do you say to your client, look, these are the only ones that I can offer. They're excellent, and this is why they would suit you or whatever. Or do you say, this is the only ones I can offer. I suggest you go shop around and see if there's anything else out there that you want. And
that's improved a lot. I mean, it's gone from probably 80% of financial services to much less than that, but it's still like vertical integration and I guess advice providers or the professionals working for a product provider is still very prevalent.
It is. And the thing is, and I can see the difficulty in that the products that you have, if you believe in them and you're working for an organization and you think they're absolutely excellent and you're providing them to you as an opportunity or an option to your client, well, you feel that you are doing the right thing by your client because this is a perfect product for you. So is not letting them know that there are other products on the market that could be different and could be better, but you don't know because these are the ones you have to offer. Is that a conflict? Or a conflict could be even a more personal conflict. So, you've given advice to someone or a product to someone, but you realize that their children, it's actually so when there's children involved and families involved, I suppose there's that issue of you give a product to someone, is it for their benefit or is it for their children's benefit? And if they say, I want it to, so if you don't have that conversation with them, then things get really messy.
Again, the communication, right?
The communication,
and I guess
absolutely.
you've got the other examples where if you're working for an employer that creates products and your job, you're paid to look at to make recommendations to people, clients, customers, and you're not really paid to tell those customers to go somewhere else. I mean, if we go
you're not.
If I go to a Ford dealership, then the Ford salesman is not going to last he's not going to have a job for very long if he keeps sending me across the road to Holden. So, that issue still remains, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah, that's what I meant before. That's exactly what I meant. But it does. But, the Ford's a very good car. It's an excellent car. It's as good as a Holden, really. To some people, it might be better. So, yeah, it's complex. But ultimately, your duty is, and it's not just in financial advice. It's, and I think this is where it gets complicated. So financial advisors like yourself are professionals. So you have a professional duty to put your client above all else. But what if you work in a bank or you work in insurance or you work in superannuation sector where you're not an official, professional? And yes, your organization says it's all about the customer, but suddenly, is that going to be at the expense of something else? And there's a lot of trade-offs that need to happen in any organization. In a sense, being an advisor, I think you guys are lucky because you have a duty, an outright duty to your role. That's why I think you're really,
right?
That's what I mean. That's why I think it's an absolute privilege to be in that position.
And I guess from your commentary there, it's important for listeners as consumers to, again, going back to understanding who they're dealing with and what to expect, I guess.
It is. I had this really interesting conversation just earlier today with some young financial services folk, all different. Some were from a mutual, some were from the retail, some were insurance, all different. And the subject of remuneration came up. And one of the people I was chatting to said, well, they work at a mutual, and they said, well, we don't have any bonuses. And then another person from a different organization said, people wouldn't do their jobs if there weren't bonuses. And then someone else, so all these different ideas around remuneration. And the issue came up around, that is the ultimate conflict of interest, where you're being paid to do your job beyond your wage and you're being incentivized. And even though the incentives are definitely changed, the industry's done remarkably good at linking those incentives to customer satisfaction, and linking those incentives to good things that deliver on the purpose of the organization. There's no doubt, right, that that's what they've done. But at the end of the day, as an individual, you get to make that choice. And if it's a choice that could offer you an extra $10,000 at the end of the quarter or not, and you've just had a baby or you've just taken up a mortgage or you really want that boat. Oh my God, you want that boat, or, your kid has a disability and you've got an operation that could fix it. Like you could go on and on, the rationalizations that we come under. And I wonder, is it fair to put people in that position where they may have to, feel that conflicted and potentially make a wrong choice? I think it's a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, I've always said a lot of those issues have come about not because there were bad advisors or bad, people doing it, but the structures in place that
The
put people in these
system,
difficult situations.
it's
Cause
hard,
those
right?
changes, right?
And even if which is being done, and I'm actually, I'm in ethics, and people go, oh, my friends are like, oh my God, because came, of course, from a performing background in the arts, so needless to say, fairly left. That's no surprise. And they're like, what are you doing with the banks? What are you doing with the corporates? What are you've sold your soul or whatever. But I'm like, no, I work for not-for-profit. I've certainly not sold my soul. But the thing is, I see such potential, and I see such good in financial services. I mean, a majority of it is good, really good. These people want to do the right thing, but then you look at systems like that. Like, I would love a really deep conversation about remuneration, and about, like, doctors don't get bonuses, nurses don't get bonuses, teachers don't get bonuses, I don't get bonuses,
Mm.
so you don't get bonuses. So, I mean, that fee for service, that structure out of advice was cleared, and all the grandfather clauses, so that you didn't get rolling
Mm.
bonuses for your products, which was just gravy train stuff. So why do we need to have them? If is there a reason other than to drive growth, and growth meaning money? And I don't know. I'm not saying it's right, and I'm not saying it's wrong, because that's not my position on. It's not my role. It's not my right to do that. But yeah,
It's a
I'd
question
like to
worth
have
asking.
more discussions, and deeper discussions around it. And yeah, anyway, it's an
Mm.
interesting topic,
Yeah, we could
remuneration.
talk about that for a long time. Cris, I do want to make sure we touch on ethical investing.
Hmm.
Again, another area that's become incredibly popular, and sought after and marketed, and lots of different things. But how do you define ethical investing, or
I think
ESG? What environmental,
yeah,
social
so
governance, all these
yeah, and
sorts of
see, it's all that stuff.
buzzwords?
So, well, there's just different kind of
Mm.
investing. I think if you look at ESG, it's more of a structure in place that says, we're going to um, still make money, but we're going to invest in ethical products and services and whatnot. Whereas you might look at someone like Future Super, who is impact, saying all
Mm.
of our money is actually going to invest in something that has impact on ethical issues. Or you can work with other organizations that say, I'm going to divest, so I'm going to stop putting
Mm.
money into things, but you're not necessarily. So they're quite varied. And from the work I've looked at on this, one of the biggest issues right now is that there's no set standards. So, like you said, there's a lot of, like, the net zero, the climate change. There are so many buzzwords around that. Do they all mean the same thing? Do they mean different things? Are there different standards? If you go in and look at the kind of ESG, and ethical investment world, the amount of acronyms for the different standards. So
Mm.
yes, I know somebody who works in in a wealth management organization anyway, and they call themselves ethical, and I'm like, what do you mean by that? What do you mean
Mm.
you're
Mm.
calling yourself ethical? Because I know what they're investing in. I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, oh, but we're doing it transparently, we're doing it blah blah blah, we're blah blah blah. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, you
Mm.
can buy ethical vitamins now. What does that mean? What is an ethical vitamin? Are you
Mm.
telling me that there's no animal testing on this vitamin? Are you telling me that, I don't know what you're telling me? You're
Mm.
throwing that word
Mm.
out there. What does that mean? Um, so yeah, I think that the movement towards ethical investing, is fabulous. I think that superannuation will ultimately become more powerful than the banks, just purely because of the money they have.
Mm.
And they're calling institutions to account, I think, is is a good thing, not like a name and shame, but you know, you need to do this the right way. Your governance needs to be in line.
That governance piece is incredibly important, I think.
So I think it's a good thing. I think going back to the virtue signaling piece, there's a number of people that are jumping on the gravy train and calling themselves ethical investors. And I would say that, you know, if you are looking at doing that, that you've got to go to the website, to the papers, to the quarterly, you know, the annual reports. You've got to look at that reporting. And if it's not there, and it's not always there, then ask, you know, what do you invest in?
And the way that those things are implemented are, as you said, just so far and wide. As you know, one investment manager might be investing in impact things, or only or running not for profit, or literally only investing in businesses that do certain things. Or if we use to use a more clear example, you know, one might say, we don't buy any mining companies, for example, if that's their position on that. And so they won't invest in any mining companies, for example. Another one might say, well, we will go underweight mining companies. So when the All Ordinaries Index has 10% in XYZ mining company, we will go to 8% because we are going to underweight them. But they might still use that as a positioning to say, well, that's an ethical thing, or that's an ESG thing. So it's really hard to know without looking under the bonnet, like you said. And I think what I've found, because we talk about this stuff with clients, I think it's incredibly important. But what I've found is that before we even start looking at the products and the options that are out there, which is kind of what we do as humans, and the many years of working with clients, is that we look for a solution, but often we're looking for the solution without actually knowing what we're after, without diagnosing the problem or diagnosing what we're actually looking for. So whenever we have discussions with clients and they're asking for, do you have any ethical investments? Our approach is firstly, well, what do you mean
what
by
do you
ethical?
consider? What do you consider ethical?
To you? What's important to you? Once you can clearly define what you're looking for and what your values are from an ethical perspective, then can we go and look at solutions out there. But there's no point me coming and saying, here's an ethical investment, because you've asked for an ethical investment and I've said, here's an ethical investment. Well, what you think is an ethical investment and what I think is an ethical investment and what the fund manager thinks is an ethical investment might be totally different. So, you know, and I guess I'm a bit frank, and I'll say, I don't want to just give you an ethical investment so you can tick that box and feel better about yourself. If you actually want ethical, let's talk about it. Let's talk about the underlying issues. What is it's just another sense of virtue signaling, isn't it?
Exactly. And it's also, so, you know, you wanted to have ethical investments, but in what area? Like, do you feel that climate is an issue? Do you think modern slavery is an issue? Do you think, you know, treatment of animals is an issue? What is it that you think is something that is unethical right now that you can, you know, and you can have an impact on that? Ideally, we could get rid of coal. That would be an amazing thing if we could be completely renewable, but it is going to take a little bit of time. And what can we invest in now and divest out of, and how can we do that so that we don't have rolling blackouts, you know, because there's no money being put into infrastructure. So how do we do this in a smart way? I suppose you need policy from government. That would help.
The bipartisan support on some, you know,
anything.
Everyone agrees, all right?
Anything.
On anything, yeah.
Anything. Policy would be really helpful in the climate change space. So people could invest money and could start to strategize on how the hell we get out of coal. But anyway.
But you said something very pertinent there, which is we can't have everything. And so I guess it comes back to the beginning, which is we need to have an ethical framework or process in order to make those choices or figure out, you know, what we want to do or what those choices are going to be based on our values, based on our ethics, based on what we think is good for ourselves, but right
in society
as well.
And that's right. At the Ethics Centre actually helps develop those frameworks for corporations. And they become really useful in things like, I remember ANZ using their ethical framework when they had to determine a set amount allowed on credit cards for gambling. And that was quite a decision that had to be made, and it was something that they were very proud of because it was very in line with their ethical framework. And I think more and more in society now, because of changing and varied and polarized community expectations, at the very minimum, what an organization can do now is to develop that framework and understand your purpose and your values and your principles, articulate that, and live by it without hypocrisy, and you will have integrity. The thing is, not everyone is going to like that. So, for example, the credit card, the gambling limit on credit cards, there might be some people out there that are absolutely appalled by that decision. Then don't go and bank with that bank, because the bank has told you what their purpose and their values and their principles are, and they're going to live by that, and they're going to have integrity. And if you don't like that, then you go somewhere else. You don't get to yell at the institution for doing the wrong thing if they're having integrity and doing exactly what they told you they were going to do. Then it's your choice. And, I think, that's the kind of, activity that we're seeing, I think, more and more in organizations. They're making that real effort, because if you keep adjusting your strategy or your policies or your behavior to adapt to changing community expectations, you are going to find yourself in a position where you are doing something that is opposed to what it is that you said you were going to do, and you're going to be accused of being hypocritical, and you will ultimately be unethical, and you will lose your integrity, and there'll be reputational damage. So, I think you need that really solid framework.
Well, I think that's a brilliant place to finish up on, Cris. We've been chatting for quite a while. Before I let you go, this topic is very much linked to the philosophy of the podcast, purpose, values. And, one thing we know is that, each of us have got different ways that we define our purpose, and the way we define our purpose can also change at different points in our lives. So, based on, everything you've been through so far and 10 years work at the Ethics Centre now, how would you define your purpose right now?
My purpose. I think from a professional perspective, my purpose is to help corporate Australia embed ethics into the systems and processes and the DNA of an organisation. I feel really strongly about that, actually. I don't know if it's just grown on me over time, but I do. And I do feel strongly about that purpose. I don't know if it's any different, me obviously it's different. as a mum and a partner, my purpose isn't to embed ethics into my family, that's for sure. Although it kind of is in a way, I guess. So that would be my corporate purpose. I think, I don't know if I can actually answer that as an individual. I don't know. I have to think about that.
Well, it's not something easy to figure out, that's for sure.
No, it's not. And, and it can be really broad, to provide a safe environment for the people I love, or to be there. I find that a fair bit, to provide support and friendship and loyalty to the people I care about. That's a strong purpose for me. I went into, psychology and counselling and so that's something I've noticed I do in my life. And the social justice thing is always, right from being expelled through to what I do now, has always been something as well. So I think there's a thing around just wanting to help create an environment where things are fair and just, and maybe loyalty is a principle in that. I'm not sure. I don't know. See.
Yeah.
It's
well.
hard. What about you? What's your purpose?
I'm still figuring it out. Again, we have these discussions with clients all the time, and I think we try and articulate it in a certain way, and it's hard to figure out. And I think for me, it's very much broadly speaking, helping people in this, particularly being involved in the money world, and a society that feels like it's becoming more and more materialistic and driven by materialistic things, and climbing social ladders and these sorts of things. It's so easy to get caught up in that stuff. But if we can help, if we ourselves and if we can help our clients make sure that they look back in 30 years' time and say, yep, you know what, I did stuff because it was based on what's important to me and my values, then that's for us, that's a successful relationship. And if we can help clients and keep them accountable to that as well, because if that's what they want. That's
sounds like a good purpose.
That's kind of what we're trying to do. Yeah.
Well, you get to try and do it or live it every day in your work.
Yeah.
Isn't that good?
Great. It's great. Yeah. And that's the joy of it, being able to, genuinely help people and impact people's lives in a way that's more than just about money. That's, the more I do this, the more I realize that money is important, but there are other things in life that are far more important. And I think having open conversations about that and acknowledging that is the case and being clear about what those things are for us, again, enables us to make decisions which are in alignment with the things that are most important to us and the things that are more important than money itself.
I think you're right. I think, money is a means to an end, and so often, well, not maybe as much anymore, but we see it flipped. We see money as the end and people get used as a means to an end. And that's when ethics just disappears. Yeah.
And I think what I've found is that because we don't naturally think about, life's so crazy, right? It's so busy. There's so much going on. We don't naturally stop and think, why am I doing all of this? What's the point of all this stuff that I'm doing?
Yeah.
In the absence of having a discussion about values and purpose, our default is to just say, well, I probably just need more money and I'll be happier and I'll be able to do more stuff. And it's kind of the default position is that if I have more money, I'll be happier. So, and that can lead to behaviors and decision-making, which, counterintuitively actually lead us in a path that may not be what we actually want.
That's so true. And I wrote an article recently on why do we have to use GDP as our measure for success? And I actually asked an economist who was at this conference. I said, why do we have to use GDP? Why does it always have to be money focused? And he came back and said, it's because it is the one universal measurement that's used around the world. And now in a global society, we need to be able to measure ourselves and our growth against other countries in the world. But I'm not convinced. Have you read a book by Kate Raworth called Donut Economics?
I haven't, no.
Oh, it's like, I highly recommend it. I've read it twice. I really, really recommend
Economics. All right, we'll put that in the show notes as well, Cris.
It's a great book. And in fact, her donut model was on the table when they were developing the UN responsible goals, sustainability goals.
Yeah, right.
They said that to Kate. They're like, we have put your model on the table and we are using that to guide us to develop the sustainability goals. It's a great book.
Fantastic. Yeah, sounds like a must read.
Yeah. If you're a bit geeky.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thanks, Cris. This has been a brilliant chat. We went down all different paths, but thanks for your time, and I really enjoyed it and learned a lot from it. So thanks very much.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Our aim is to share the knowledge with as many people as possible, so please share it with everyone you know. And if you're enjoying the show, please subscribe and visit our website, richwithpurpose.com.au, to get access to all our free resources. See you next time.